There's nothing easy about hiring, but there's one thing you absolutely do not want to do. Among all the bad things that you could be doing, don't do this one thing. We're going to be talking about it today and why something has really gotten under my skin. A very common practice in the hiring world is to have someone come do a little bit of a test project, come do a little bit of a show of skills, which there's nothing wrong with that, but the way it's being done is a problem in today's business world. We're going to be diving into that topic today. Hello, everyone. My name is Blake Benz. I'm the host of the Good Advice Podcast. I appreciate you tuning in today and getting some good advice on how to grow and scale your business. We're going to be talking about the practical applications of actually hiring well, interviewing well, and including some scary stories that I've been told over the years that might just blow your mind. Before we dive into it, though, we do have a word from one of the amazing businesses that sponsors the podcast. Of course, if you ever thought about advertising on the podcast, you got to reach out. Blake at goodadvicecoaching.com, and we'll get you set up with a snazzy, fun ad. Or if you want to support the podcast on our Patreon, you can just go to patreon.com/goodadvice. All that to say, here's a quick ad, and we'll be back soon. There's one single piece of advice that I give to business owners who are ready to scale their business drastically. And that's knowing exactly what you need to hand off so that you can continue focusing on what you're an expert in. It amazes me when I talk to business owners who are doing their own bookkeeping and tax prep, and worse, that they're going through all this paperwork at 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock, even midnight, slaving away trying to make sense of all of the numbers for their business. Business owners who are making it happen have already figured out that you can't do it all yourself. That's why I recommend Steve Lay with Equity Business Solutions. Not only is he an expert in bookkeeping and tax prep, but what I love about Steve is that he'll sit down with you and help you make sense of the value of your business beyond just reading a spreadsheet. You'll be able to make better decisions, and more importantly, you're going to save yourself the crucial time you would have spent going through QuickBooks or an Excel spreadsheet or whatever it is that keeps us up late at night. So save yourself some time and some money by giving Steve Lay a call at Equity Business Solutions, and he'll show you the value beyond your numbers. Go to equitybusinesssolutionsllc.com to find out more. All right, I'm rolling up the sleeves today. We're gonna do a little battling here, which I think probably by now, if you listen to the podcast, if you listen to it long term, you're probably pretty well inclined for us to see things relatively similarly. Now, I don't always have people who listen to the podcast who see things eye to eye with the way that I see things. And I think, by the way, for a world that's so crazy politicized where you have to have your stance and your take and your thoughts on different things, I think it's actually pretty good that we have a little corner of the podcasting world where, hey, we may not always agree on things, and that's okay. But I want to talk about something that, and I always give the disclaimer in the past where I'm like, hey, this is just what I think. You might feel differently. You might think differently, and that's okay. Today's going to be a little bit of a different spin. Today, we're going to be talking about one of the things that I think is a non-negotiable in terms of how to do business, in terms of doing business well. It's not necessarily like moral obligation, even so much of an ethical obligation. I think it's just something that you should do this whenever it comes to hiring people. Now, this came to mind because I was reading a post on LinkedIn where somebody got hired, somebody was trying to fill a role as a social media manager. And what ended up happening was that person was then asked to do some kind of project related to social media. So what the person did was, as any, starving artist would, they did the project, they fired it off. They said, hey, let me know. Here's all the work you asked me to do for you. Well, they didn't get the job. Someone else got the job. Well, what do you think happened to that work? That work then got used by the business for part of their social media. I have a big problem with this. If you're watching the video on this podcast, I'm smiling, kind of, I'm trying not to, get too silly about this, but I don't want to say you're a bad person if you do this, but you might be a bad business owner if you do this. Now, it's pretty rare that I come across anybody who does something like this who intentionally is trying to take advantage of people. In fact, often the way we do things in business is what someone else has taught us to do. This applies to many facets of business. I remember there was a business owner that I was talking to. He had a team of about 5 or 6 people, and it was the end of the year. He had a massive surplus in terms of his revenue, in terms of his profit on his business. And we were talking, and he was like, "Hey, I have like 60K. Can I just like split it up and give everyone 10K as like a bonus?" Well, I'm not supposed to do that, am I? And I was like, You can do that. That's okay. You can do that." But he was like, "Oh, okay. I thought I maybe like wasn't supposed to or wasn't allowed to or something." So a lot of times we don't do things, or we do things a certain way because that is how we've been conditioned or taught to do it. The same thing is true, by the way, with hiring and, and not even so much unpaid work. I think the hiring process, many people, the way they do an interview is based on how they were once interviewed. It's like, "Hey, tell me about a time that you overcame a challenging obstacle." We have like the questions we're never supposed to ask, and every now and then you have like the more obnoxious questions. I remember once I was interviewing for a job at Chewy's, and people who know me know that I love Chewy's. But I was interviewing for this job at Chewy's, and the guy asked, "Tell me a joke." And in that moment, I can't tell you the amount of pressure I felt. It was like, what joke do I go to? And I'm a pretty dry guy. I'm pretty sarcastic sense of humor. So I was like, okay, I know that if I'm too sarcastic, I'm going to come off as a jerk. If I'm too dry, it may not hit right. And then I was like, but I don't want to be slapstick. So I have like this inner turmoil that takes the place over like, maybe 4 seconds as I'm trying to think of a joke. And I think I told the joke, and he like gave me like this slight smile and was like, "Huh, that's funny," which means it totally was not funny. Right. Anyway, so I did, by the way, get that job. So I guess the joke was actually not too bad. But there's been many things over the years in the hiring process that I think people tell us to do these things, to ask these kinds of questions. And, just like with sales, a good hiring process is going to involve having an honest conversation, a genuine conversation, and really getting to the bottom of what kind of person you're talking to. I think not only are you trying to get a judge of character of someone, you're also trying to demonstrate your own values as a business. It's to your advantage for someone to not be a starving artist, to not be desperate, so desperate that they'll come work for you, but for them as well to make a decision on, is this the right business for me to work with? And that's not always the case. Sometimes you have people who you're just misaligned. You see business in different ways. It's not a good fit. It's not going to work long-term, what have you, you get it. But in terms of the first part of that question, the first part of that conversation on bad hiring practices, I haven't told these stories in a long time, but actual stories, these both came from LinkedIn. This was a thread years ago of HR people sharing their favorite ways to interview. And me, as someone who, I'm interested in business, but I have a background in leadership. I was like, yeah, I'm curious, like, what are some of the best ways to hire? This was basically a thread of people being 100% honest with each other and not realizing how wildly crazy their ideas sounded. So one person had an idea of, they were sharing what they like to do. They like to put the interviewee in their interviewing room, and they put them in the interview room and they say, "Hey, I'll be back in about 10 minutes. I need to go just take care of something." By the way, this is very rude. It's very rude to your person's time. Some people do this intentionally as like a power play. Like, let's see how they respond. Let's see how bad they want it. You can just know that all of those things are incredibly obnoxious. Don't do those things. But what this person was talking about, they said, "Hey, I leave them in the interview room and then I leave. And what I have on the interviewing table is a basket of laundry, like fresh out of the dryer. Now, when I come back in 10 minutes, if the laundry has been folded, that tells me they're a team player, they're a go-getter, they're assertive, they're ambitious, and I immediately want to know more about this person. If the laundry isn't folded, that tells me that they're above getting their hands dirty, that they, they're not a team player, what have you, whatever things you want to get from that. And naturally, like the echo chamber of some of these threads, you have people commenting like, oh, that's great. That's a great idea. Whatever. Let's just be very clear about something. Okay. You are wild if you think that there's anything appropriate about dumping your laundry and your underwear and what have you on a desk for a professional adult to deal with. You can know it says more about your business than it does about any kind of hiring trick or strategy. Another one, there's more, but wait, there's more. From the same thread, or maybe this was the one, maybe a couple days later, I can't remember. This was all years ago. Another conversation. Someone said they called it the dish trick. And I've actually seen versions of this pop up in slightly different forms. Here's the dish trick. The interviewee comes in and you say, hey, do you want a cup of coffee? You want a glass of water, whatever. Yeah, sure. Okay. You get him the cup of coffee. You walk into like the break room or whatever it is. You get the cup of coffee, you hand it to him. You go to the interview room, what have you. At the end of the interview, if the interviewee doesn't offer to take the dish back to the break room and put it in the sink and clean it, this is a reflection of their character. It's a reflection that they don't want to get their hands dirty, that they're above, whatever tasks you might ask them to do. And the person sharing the story, the way they framed it was, they said, no matter how good the interview goes, if they don't do this with the dish, if they don't take the dish and put it back and clean it, I will not hire that person. No matter how good the interview goes, I will not hire them if they don't succeed in the dish test. You can know this is incredibly stupid. You will have great talent that comes through your doors that they would see it as nervy to suppose that they should take the dish back to the break room, that you have people who maybe are anxious over a role. Maybe they're not a good interviewer. Maybe they're not very extroverted, but they're really great at their proficiency or their profession. And so of all the things they're thinking about, maybe you're one of the 8 interviews they have that day, and they're getting out the door to go to the next interview, and they're not thinking about the dish. My point is, and I don't necessarily hate the reasoning behind it. I think my issue is the comment on, if they don't put the dish back, no matter how good the interview goes, I won't hire them. I think that's what gets under my skin the most, because you're putting so much stock into a hack, into a hiring hack, rather than having a genuine conversation with someone. And I've learned over the years in business that many times we are seeking out those hacks instead of growing ourselves as professionals. Being a great salesperson takes an enormous amount of work. I have very far to go in my sales journey. But what I often do when I approach sales is, how do I need to grow? How did I miss it? What went well? Okay, I closed this great deal. Well, what boxes did I tick? What did I do well here? This other deal was a surefire sale. It didn't pan out. Why didn't it? And I'm constantly evaluating and trying to grow. Well, change and growth is not a comfortable process. So what I have learned is that what people will often do instead is, hey, just send this email and it has a 90% close rate. Hey, just do this one thing in your sales and it will totally double your sales pipeline. All these different hacks that people like to rely on, these silver bullets that they want to try to drastically transform their business rather than learning to be a better professional. I think the same thing is true in our hiring processes. But alas, we're not here to talk about all these silly, obnoxious hiring strategies. I want to talk about some good advice that I got. Whenever I was hiring my social media gal, I got into this question, and I mentioned earlier, sometimes you do things because you don't know what you're supposed to do. Well, here's what I wanted to do. When I was hiring my social media gal, it ended up being a gal. I didn't care if it was a guy or girl when I was first hiring. When I was hiring, I thought, okay, I want to actually see a portfolio of work. I want to see what someone can do with social media. So one of the things that I did was I did the job posting, and I got something like I think I got like 200 or 300 applications for the job. I whittled that down to, I think it was around 10 or 15 people. And I asked those people for interviews. And the way I whittled it down was I basically looked to see like what their work history was. There were some people who applied who were like working jobs, but they always wanted to do social media. And I was like, I don't think I'm really looking for someone who's like just getting into the profession. So I was looking for people who had a history of social media work and also like video production, because I was porting some of my podcast content onto social media. So I whittled that down to 10. And my thinking was, I'm going to interview them. And if the interview goes well, I'm going to ask them to do a project for me, a test project. And the test project was basically, I'm going to give them a bunch of raw podcast files. And I'm going to ask them, hey, come up with some social media content for me. Come up with like a couple of posts. Now, I also put some parameters on this. I didn't want them to like spend an entire weekend on it. So I said, hey, you come up with 2 or 3 posts, but at most you shouldn't spend more than this much time on it. And the content itself should not be longer than this, just so you don't feel like you're spending all this time on it. So my thinking was, I had already whittled down the list to 10 to 15. I was going to interview them. If it felt like their character, their values, if it felt like we gelled in terms of like our approach to business, like if we were in sync, then I would invite them to do the test project. And if I liked what I saw from the test project, my plan was to hire them. No more interviews, nothing else, which by the way, that's another obnoxious thing, is when, you have like 9 interviews with someone. It's like that says more about your inefficiencies than it does about the person. Anywho, so I got into the situation where I was like, okay, I want these people to do some social media content for their test project, but am I supposed to pay them? So I got some good advice. I reached out to Jackie Hermes. Jackie is the CEO of Excelity Marketing. She runs a marketing company for SaaS businesses. She's been on the podcast. She's an amazing, incredible entrepreneur, an incredible professional. She has, I think, around like 100,000 followers on LinkedIn. She's just incredible. So she's come on the podcast. We've talked a lot about this. Well, I sent her a DM. I said, hey, Jackie, here's the situation I'm in. I want to do this test project. Do I pay them or do I not? And if I don't pay them, do I put some kind of disclaimer? I'm like, we're not going to use your work, what have you? Like, what do I do? And Jackie gave me some great advice. She basically said, Blake, you should pay them. Which I kind of thought, oh man, that could be a lot of money. I mean, 10 people, like, okay. And I said, okay, well, tell me more. So you think I should pay them? And she was like, Blake, really at the end of the day, it's not about who you're going to hire and who you're not going to hire. And it's not even so much for the practicality of doing a test project. If you're going to run a business that values people, don't you want to communicate that from the first interaction you have with them, that you value people? And that resonated with me. I was like, yes, absolutely. So here's what I did on this test project. I said, hey, here's the parameters on it. At the end of this test project, you're going to get $100. So please don't spend more than a couple hours on it. But if you do, just know whatever you come up with, whether it's a great end result or a terrible one, whether this goes into the trash bin or this goes, it's spectacular, you're going to get $100 regardless. No strings attached. I really felt right about that. I felt like, it's like what Jackie said, I'm establishing how I want to value my employees from the get-go. So the funny thing, though, here's what's interesting. I think I extended the test project to maybe 5 people. So I did the interviews. I did, I think, around 10 or 12 interviews. Of those interviews, I told them at the end, if they weren't going to get the test project, I said, you know what, doesn't sound like it's a good fit. Thanks so much. The other, I think about 5, I said, hey, I want you to do this test project. I want to see some of your work. Here's the parameters, yada, yada. and then let me know. Of those 5, only 2 actually sent me back the test project. One of them was junk. They got their $100. The other one was fantastic, and they got their $100. And this person ended up working for me for maybe about 6 months, and then we parted ways. Which the moral of the story isn't so much, you're finding your employee for life. And I think there's some people out there who have such a toxic view on business. They'd be like, see, that person only stayed for 6 months. You wasted $100. And it's like, no, for 6 months, I valued that person. From the first interaction I had with them, I valued them. I let them know that I valued them. I have a real problem with how business is being done in the hiring world today. I have a real problem with businesses that ask for unpaid work and then take that work and use that work without the knowledge of the person applying, or sometimes with the knowledge of the person applying. I think business should be less about how much you can squeeze out of someone, how much you can wring someone like a sponge to get as much as possible from them, and instead all the more about valuing people well. Sometimes I had a friend of mine share this with me probably a few months ago. We were talking about employees and people on his team, and he was faced with a decision that ideally could save the business a lot of money, or it would cost the business money, but it would communicate immense value to his team. And he said, Blake, sometimes what's best for the business is not what's best for the bottom line. I loved that line. What was best for the bottom line was to do this thing that would deeply hurt his team members, that would frustrate his team members, that would say a lot about how they valued them. And it actually kind of reminds me of, those emails you get from the boss or like the middle manager or whatever that's like, we're so appreciative of you. And they give you like the pizza party, and it's kind of become like this running joke nowadays. I think there's a difference between businesses that say they value their people and businesses that really value their people. One of the things that I think is most valuable in the management conversation, in the hiring conversation, is being crystal clear on what you value and what those values look like. Saying you value people, that's not like, putting the values on the wall, having like cool marketing around your people. We celebrated a birthday on our team, which those things are fine. I'm not saying don't celebrate birthdays in your company. But few businesses actually go the extra mile and take care of their people and value them well. I think good management is doing just enough that you feel like you're doing something wrong. Not like don't steal from your employees. This feels wrong. Good management is, I think, doing just enough that's countercultural, counter-corporate. And it's amazing how much it stands out to people. Here's an example. Think about a boss who calls you. What's your first thought? What have I done wrong? What do you need? Yes. What's up? What's going on? Imagine a boss who calls you and doesn't need anything. Hey, I was just checking in. Do you need anything? Is anything frustrating you? Have I created any bottlenecks that I need to fix for you? How can I make your life easier this week? What can I do to make you successful this week? And to not have any ask or any request or any, and by the way, could you make sure you get this project done? Imagine a boss who does that, which, by the way, I'm also not talking about the boss who calls you for 2 hours to like just, shoot the breeze. And you're like, hey, I got to get back to work. I'm talking a boss who calls you for 5-10 minutes. Hey, what's going on? How are you? How's the fam? Hey, I know you had a birthday this last week. How was it? It was your daughter's birthday. What'd y'all do? That's awesome. Oh, I love that place. Hey, I took my kids there. Hey, have you ever thought about going here? And you know what's so funny about these kinds of episodes on the podcast is there's really nothing that intelligent about it. There's nothing about this that is hard to understand. It's just that the majority of people won't do it. And the majority of people have been taught that there's more to leadership than just being a normal human being and treating people with dignity. I remember back when I worked at the previous consulting firm that I was with, we were a leadership consulting firm. And I was doing executive coaching and leadership coaching. And I remember I was talking to a guy. He was like, so you're telling me that in the mornings I should go around the office and say hey to everybody? And I was like, more or less, that's a good starting point. And he was like, why? I was like, well, no one on your team likes you. They don't trust you. Your people are leaving in droves. This is a good starting point. And this person could not understand, like, I don't get it. I don't get it. I don't get being human. Because in his mind, the boss was not to be talked to unless something was needed and only when it was necessary and urgent. It's countercultural, counter-corporate to develop relationships with your people, to be genuine with your people, shockingly, to be transparent with your people and ask for nothing in return. Simple ways to value your people. And again, when it comes to valuing them, you can't be the business that says, oh, I value my people. I've always loved businesses, by the way, who say something like that, and then they pay minimum wage, which you're going to pay the wage you're going to pay, But I've always felt like it was such a disconnect. The business is like, oh, we really value our people. And it's like, you value $10 an hour. That's what you value, So for me, whatever wage I pay, I've just always wanted it to be a little bit more than what the standard rate was. The social media gal who started working for me, she started, and this was, 2-3 years ago. She started at $27 an hour, which I felt like was a pretty good starting rate for someone who, new to my industry, new to my world, and was hungry to learn. So, but I knew I didn't want to do, $10 an hour, $15 an hour, what have you, because I wanted her to know, hey, I value you. All that to say, none of this is easy. None of this is simple. But if your North Star, if your guiding principle is, how do I take care of my people? How do I show them value from the first moment that I meet them? You'll be in a good place. Associated with this, by the way, are companies that ask people to interview and then never talk to them again. You ever been to a job interview that you never heard back from them? Like months went by. I actually, one time, I applied for a job at the U of A. This was years ago, probably like 8 or 9 years ago. I applied for a job at the U of A. It was like 15 months later I heard back, and they were like, hey, just letting you know, we decided to go a different direction. And I was like, it's been over a year. Like, are you okay? Are you all right? What's going on over there? I'm sure by now they've sorted everything out, but, when a person hiring ghosts you, I think that's a major pain point as well. Take care of your people, show people value, regardless of what they've done for you lately or what they can do for you in the near future. Things to think about. Hey, thanks for listening to today's episode. I so appreciate you. Don't forget, we got this podcast. We're updating it twice a week. You can always stay subscribed to the podcast to get our latest content. You also go to our LinkedIn profile or our website. And also, we have a podcast agency now called Podcastable. You can drop us a review on Google or check us out also on social media. All that to say, thanks so much for listening today. That's today's good advice. We'll see you later.